Well, let's talk a little bit more in specifically about this trade war, because there was a recent Financial Times article that said that China is actually prepared to weather the storm and really battle the United States and Donald Trump with this. Can you kind of break that down a little bit further? What is the strategic advantages that China has in this trade war against the U.S.?
Yeah, the reality is the trade war didn't start in 24, not for China. For China, the trade war started in 2018. The single, most important event for China of the past decade or so was the US blocking semiconductor sales to China in 2018. When that happened, the Chinese leadership thought, okay, the US is declaring economic war on us. The US is now trying to prevent us from growing. Today it's semiconductors. Tomorrow it could be auto parts. It could be chemical products. It could be any number of things. We have no choice but to build self-sufficiency and resiliency in every single industrial vertical. And incidentally, that's when the real estate bust started. Because in 2018, the Chinese government told the banks, guys, no more loans to real estate. From now on, all the loans go to industry. And so you saw loans to real estate absolutely collapse. You saw loans to industry go through the roof. And so, fast forward 6-7 years to today, now all of a sudden, China is basically self-sufficient in every industry. It's actually leapfrogged the Western world in every industry. Again, you see it in the cars, you see it in the telecom switches, you see it in the batteries and the solar panels, you name it. And China is now independent. So I think that China is much more able to withstand the shock from a possible trade war. What are the means of pressure that the US has? The semiconductor card has essentially been played. And China has now spent 6-7 years spending a lot of money to move up the value chain on semiconductors. It's not yet at the very peak, but it's getting close enough. So that card has been played. You have the energy card. That's why China spent so much on solar. That's why China spent so much on wind, so much on nuclear. But now China has built pipelines into Kazakhstan. It's built pipelines into Russia. And to be honest, to play the energy card, the US would have to go to places like Qatar and like Saudi Arabia and tell them you're not allowed to sell to China anymore. And it's not obvious that these guys would go along with the US this time around. It's not obvious that these guys would go along with the US because China is now their biggest customer,
Right.
and the US is no longer a customer. The US is now independent self-energy. So the US goes to Saudi Arabia and say, hey, you can't sell to your biggest customer anymore. Saudi Arabia is going to say, so who am I supposed to sell to? So the methods of pressure, I think, on China for the trade war are actually decently limited. The one method of pressure the US could conceptually have had was to go around to ASEAN, to go around to Europe, to go around to Latin America and say, hey, I know that China's your biggest trade partner, but come on, like these guys have an undervalued currency. They're running a 1.1 trillion trade surplus. This just can't last. So let's all get together and force China to revalue and force China to stop running $1.1 trillion trade surplus. That conceptually could have worked because, a lot of these export markets are now more important to China than the US. China now exports roughly 20% more to ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Countries. It now sells 20% more to Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, than it does to the United States. So if the US had been able to build an anti-China coalition, that could have been powerful. But I think that chance was gone as soon as Trump decided, I'm declaring a trade war on everybody all at once, all together. When it did this, essentially, it opened up the avenue for China to say, look, the US is not a reliable partner. They change their mind every 24 hours. We're here, we're steady, we'll continue to invest in your country. So I think that ship has now sailed. And so the US is today in a position in its trade war, which, it started 4 weeks ago, with a trade war on everybody. Then it started to try to morph it to just a trade war against China. And now it's already trying to walk back its trade war against China. It's actually almost comical where Trump yesterday comes out and says, oh, we had a great meeting with the Chinese, things are moving forward. And Xi Jinping comes out and says, we didn't meet. What is he talking about? And you're now left in this, I can't help but think of, T. Boone Pickens' old quote that when you want to deal real bad, you get a real bad deal. And this is the situation that the US has left itself in. Because, in a few weeks, the shelves will be going empty at Walmart. They'll be going empty at Target. You'll have a 4th of July with no fireworks. You'll have a
Right.
back to school shopping that will cost twice what it was costing. This is essentially what the CEO of Target, the CEO of Walmart that met recently with Trump just highlighted. They literally sat down with him and said, look, that's the back to school shopping a year ago, the back to school shopping this year is going to be plus 75%. And that we're just sharing with you that information. Meanwhile, China is sitting back doing nothing and letting Trump negotiate again himself. Like every day he's like changing the tariffs, every day he's lowering things, like, I'm excluding this, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. He's just negotiating against himself. If you're China, why would you stop? You may know Napoleon's old saying that if your enemy is making a mistake, you don't interrupt him. Right now, Trump again is negotiating against himself. China's staying quiet. I think it's the best thing they can do.
Lewis is from Trump's book, The Art of the Deal. It says the worst thing you could possibly do in a deal is seem desperate to make it. And I find it just baffling how Donald Trump has gone down this path. And I guess he's really painted himself into a corner. I mean, he doesn't really have any other option. And I mean, this was just very, very unsustainable from the beginning. Right.
And on this, I was talking about this with a friend of mine who runs a successful private equity firm. And he was telling me that, in all his years in private equity, he's done a lot of deals and he's dealt with, different types of deal makers, but invariably, when you deal with somebody very tough, sometimes you have a tough negotiation and you walk away from the negotiation thinking, wow, that guy's really good.
Right.
He's tough, but he's hard. And next time around, I need to be on the same side of the table as he is. And today, I'm not sure that's still the case. Meanwhile, the U.S. going around saying, look, we're going to tell everybody it's us or it's China, while at the same time, it is backtracking furiously on its own sanctions against China. It's not very credible. And it's all the less credible that, if you look at, the whatever it is, 170 countries in the world, 110 countries, China's already their biggest trade partner. So
Right.
there will be supply chain dislocations for the U.S. for sure.